Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Govs on the Go Alumni Edition, a podcast featuring alumni from the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. My name is Dr. Buzhoon. I'm the Dean of the college. I'm also the host of the podcast. And today, here at Clarksville's Riverfest, we have a very special guest. I'm talking with David Alford, who is a graduate from Austin Peay, and I'm not sure what the year is, David, but I know it's a different degree in communication. Welcome to the podcast.
That's right. Thank you. It's great to be here. That was a few decades ago, but we won't say how many.
No, it's we can just skip past that.
That's
but
right.
We're so glad to have you on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. It's great to be here.
And obviously, we are recording live in front of an audience. This is a different environment for me, not so different from you. You're used to being in front of people.
Sure.
So I did appreciate you being here and being the guinea pig.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. Is there any editing at all? So if I say something untoward, will it get cut out? Probably. I got a thumbs up. Nice. Okay. Thank you.
Well, let's give everybody a life update. And now, many people here in Clarksville know about you, follow you along the way. But won't you tell people what's going on in your life?
Well, sure. I, of course, was on the TV show Nashville for the 6 seasons that it was on, and then I transitioned into teaching with a good friend of mine, Anna Filippo, who's also an Austin Peay alum. She was teaching at Berry College down in Rome, Georgia, and invited me to come down and act as an artist in residence. So I joined her for 3 years down there and had a great time, and moved back home for about a year, kicked around, wrote a couple more things, and then I got the opportunity to go to teach again at Baldwin Wallace University, which is just south of Cleveland. It's a really great school with a terrific musical theater program in particular. So it's been fun. I've just started getting my feet wet up there. I recently moved, and the semester just started, so we're about 3 weeks in, but I've been really excited and pleased, and really enjoyed meeting all my colleagues. They're terrific, and the students are fantastically talented. So that's what I'm up to now.
Yeah, and you know what we're going to be talking about in the podcast about how people have impacted your life, but what I really appreciate is now, as a teacher, you're getting the opportunity to have that sort of relationship on the other end with people that will, I'm sure, be so grateful for your influence.
Well, I think that's the hope, right? I had a friend reach out to me not long ago who was a long-term actor, and he was thinking about starting some classes, and he said he was really struggling with the concept of becoming a teacher. And I said, to him, we've been doing this such a long time. If we don't have something to share with people, I feel that we're not really doing our jobs to some degree, as humans, right? As humans, to be able to sort of pass the torch a little bit and to help guide people. So,
well, we're going to talk about your career, what's going on, but I want to start all the way back at the very beginning. I call it the origin story.
Okay.
And and we're going to go back to Adams, Tennessee, which is not too far away. I made my first visit there last fall.
Okay.
You grew up on a family farm.
Right.
And you mentioned that your dad was a Methodist minister.
Sure. And farmer.
And farmer.
Yeah.
So how do you think that all those kind of things may have impacted an early David Alford?
I've told people this, and I was able to tell Dad this before he passed away, and I was really glad I got to be able to do it. I was doing a radio interview, interesting, and someone asked, who one of my strongest influences, early influences was, and I said my dad, and I think they were surprised because they were expecting me to name an actor or a writer, some famous person. And I said my dad because, I grew up watching him, he was a Methodist pastor, and I grew up watching him speak. Dad wasn't a fiery orator, he wasn't a fire and brimstone kind of guy, but his messages, his sermons were always very well researched, and he delivered them with a kind of sincerity and integrity where you really, because he did care, he legitimately cared, he brought himself to that, and he wanted to communicate something that was important to him, to the congregation. And he was able to do that so effectively, and that really informed my acting, which is really about, if you think about it, it's about sincerity, it's about veracity. I think people look for that when they want to see good acting. They want to see someone they can believe, right? And I really drew a lot from Dad. So he was definitely an early influence. And of course, just the grounding in growing up on a farm and having a dairy farm and understanding the value of work, that sort of daily effort that is required to just keep something like that going. Also informed, I think, my practice later. Acting looks fun, but the people that do it well, there's an awful lot of discipline involved as well. And I think that definitely helped with sort of the concept of work and work ethic and practice.
And your first sort of memories of performing must have been a church-related.
Well, it wasn't church.
Okay.
Actually, it was.
Okay.
Let me take that back. When I was, I think, 8 or 9, I sang a little bit, and they were looking for special music. We were at this tiny little church. My dad had a circuit of 5 churches, so Mom and my sister and I went to this little church down the road, Blooming Grove United Methodist Church, just outside of Pulaski. It's still there. And I was asked to sing a solo. And so I sang "Go Tell It on the Mountain," and I got up, and the piano player played, and I started singing, and I was horrified by the sound of my own voice, but I plugged all the way through, and I had this I thought I was going to die. I mean, I was flushed. I started, sweat. My little 8-year-old body was sweating. I was trembling. I managed to get through the song, and then afterwards, all these elderly ladies came up and pinched my cheek and said, "You're so cute. Oh, you're just a good singer." And of course, that fed some inner crack addict or something in me. And of course, you get that kind of response from your first performance. And even though it was terrifying, I definitely wanted to do it again, And so that sort of performance bug got planted very, very early.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the next sort of involvement was in grade school.
Yes.
And so you said that you wrote, directed, and starred in your own adaptation of the poem "The Courtship of Miles Standish,"
yes.
Back in 6th grade.
I put the P in precocious, absolutely. But I don't know why I decided to do that. I felt for some reason some need to do it. And so, but because it was a small school, and I mean, Joe Burns is still a relatively small school. It was even smaller then. I went to a teacher and I said, "Is it okay if I do this?" And they said, "Sure, why not?" And so I did it, and I pulled the cast together, and I wrote the script, and I did the whole thing. I directed, and I played, the title character, Miles Standish. However, I got a rude awakening because I cast my friend as John Alden, who's the romantic lead. And at the end of the show, I noticed it was pretty obvious that, I got, a nice round of applause from the students. But when he took a bow, the romantic lead, woo, all the girls went nuts. And I thought, I'm missing the boat, man. They don't care who the actor, writer, director is. They want the romantic lead. Dang. Anyway, so I learned a lot from that experience. I don't know if I put it into practice, but it was definitely a learning experience for me. So.
It's quite the preview, though, for what would happen later on in your life.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned you went to high school.
Yeah.
You were also part of a vocal group.
Sure.
The Red
River Boys. Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about that, and how did you get involved, and what kind of things were you doing?
Well, this is going to sound like a broken record, but let me preview this by saying I was playing the piano one day. There was this thing about sports. Should I do sports or should I do the creative arts? Because I felt sort of pulled in both directions. I mean, thankfully I didn't choose sports because I'm a small person and I would have been killed. But I remember, all my friends were going out for teams, and I was, wondering whether I should go out for football or something. And I was in the band room and I was playing a song on the piano because I'd been taking piano since I was about first grade. And I literally had my head down and was playing. And I looked up and there were 4 cute girls standing around the piano smiling at me, and I thought, I'm onto something.
Mm-hmm.
So music, like for many young people, music was a part of the draw was I'll get to meet people, right? I'll get to meet people who might be interested in me for my talent. Anyway, so the Red River Boys thing happened because we were all in 4-H, and there was a thing called Share the Fun. I think it's still called Share the Fun. And it was basically a talent sort of show. And one of my good friends, Reuben Buck, who's from the Clarksville area, he said, we need to get together and we should do like an Oak Ridge Boys thing because we were all in choir. And he said, let's put this band together and then you guessed it, we can meet girls. So he put it together, and the four of us sang, I think, for the first time. We failed miserably in our first gig. We did not win the Share the Fun competition. But because we enjoyed each other and we enjoyed singing and we had so much fun doing it, we stuck with it. And then eventually we wound up, doing little short tours. We wound up playing conventions. We wound up playing Dollywood and had a bus and just did the whole thing. And
Wow.
it was a ton of fun for, and it helped us pay our way through college, which was fantastic,
And again, it reinforced that whole, if I perform, people will pay attention to me.
People will pay attention to me. Which is not to say, it took a while for that not to be the most important thing, right, in performing. Eventually, I got past that, but that's a slightly different story. And it actually happened here at Austin Peay. So,
Okay,
yeah.
well, we'll get to that in that part of your life, because I think that the next step, you went to a Methodist college, a 2-year school that your family had connections with. I think your dad.
My dad had gone there and taught there. When I was young, I remember watching the students walk around in their long hair and their bell bottoms and all their tie-dye, and I thought they were all so cool and old.
What was your plan? Did you think you were going to be a performer when you went away? Did you?
No.
No.
Well, another story. I remember driving down the road once. I was probably maybe 14, and my dad asked me, son, he was like, son, have you thought about what you're going to do with your life? And I said, I'm going to be famous, Dad. And he said, okay, well, if that doesn't work out for you, maybe you should think of something you could, like as a career, as a job, Anyway, my parents were both great. They never once ever told me that what I was trying to do was unrealistic or crazy. They were always nothing but supportive. So, I was hugely lucky along those lines. But it was really, because of the band and the success of the band, I believed that, I felt that I was going to do something that was going to involve performing, for sure. I felt drawn to that. I loved doing the music. But then I came to Austin Peay and I discovered acting. I discovered theater, and it really got its hooks into me, and they're still in. I've never gotten over it.
Because you came here, you told me, as a music major.
That's right.
At Austin Peay,
Yeah.
and it didn't take you long.
Yeah.
But how did you move over to the theater side?
Right. So, and this is again, it's a very different time, right? So I was in the choir and I was taking voice lessons and with George Mabry, and he was encouraging me to breathe properly, what you should do, and to create bigger sound, which is what you should do if you're a voice major. However, I was struggling with it a little bit because I was helping to pay my tuition by singing through my nose, very country, right? I knew that it was going to definitely change the way I sounded, and that wasn't something I really wanted to do. So I was having a bit of a struggle. In the meantime, I had filled in, a good friend of mine, Sam Whited, was in a show that Joe Filippo, Austin Peay theater legend. Had written and directed. And he had to drop out because of some sort of singing gig, as I remember, some sort of singing conflict that he had to do, maybe with the select choir or something. Anyway, I wasn't in the select choir, so he asked me if I could fill in for this role in Joe's play. So I did. And then after that, I was thinking about what I should do. I was kind of concerned. Music was a little different than theater, but I liked theater. I talked to my dad, and he said, it doesn't matter what you get your degree in, just get your degree, and then you can focus on what you want to do later. And I said, that's good advice, Dad. So I went to Joe Filippo and I said, could I have a theater scholarship if I become a theater major? And again, very different time. He said, sure. So that's how I became a theater major. So it was really Joe Filippo that was the person that set me on my career path, because shortly after that, the Center for Creative Arts was established in my actually first year at Austin Peay, and I met Arthur Kopit.
And he was somebody that, when we're going to get to that next step in just a moment about getting on to Juilliard.
Yeah.
So I want to take just a pause there. I think for some people, there's a difference between performing as a musician and another one to all of a sudden get into acting, because I think that's a different type of communication.
Yeah.
You're accessing maybe a different part of your soul, your spirit.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not just about pay attention to me. Now you're trying to communicate.
Well, yes, and thank you for helping me remember that point, because it's, for me, and many musicians feel this, and I guess I have felt it to some degree when singing or performing as a musician, but there's something about being able to commit entirely to an imaginary environment, an imaginary character, and to be able to speak truth in that those imaginary circumstances and live in those imaginary circumstances and see the reaction that it has with an audience and how transportive that can be, to create that kind of environment, help create that kind of environment. It really, as I said, it set its hooks in me, and it became less about what people said to me or how they gave me compliments or, you know, what they thought of my performance, as much as it did. My favorite reactions that people come up to after the show are typically along the lines of people saying thank you. If they say thank you, I feel I've done my job. It's always nice to hear, wow, that was amazing, and you're this, that. That's always great. But when people just say thanks, that sometimes is the best thing to hear.
Wow.
Right? Because it means that we've connected on some level, right?
So what was the first, do you remember your first play?
The first play I was ever in was...
Well, in Traherne. Let's just keep it to Austin.
I'm pretty sure it was Joe Filippo's play. It was Secrets. It was the one I dropped into and played. Yeah.
So that was your first play, and
that was my first play at Austin P.
Did you continue to, you know, try to be in as many plays as you could?
Yeah, and I was, because I became a theater major. I was required to audition for everything, and then I was lucky enough to get in several things, and so. In some roles, I did a little better than others, I think. But then, of course, I met Arthur Kopit, who was a playwright from New York, and he came down as the first chair of the Center of Excellence. And he became very quickly obsessed with the Bell Witch story. I'm from Adams. I knew a lot about the Bell Witch. I was able to show Arthur around. So we connected, and he sort of, he wrote, you know, parts from the Bell Witch legend for, you know, several of the actors that were there, and he sort of cast me as the romantic lead in the story, Joshua Gardner. In his version of the Bell Witch story, Joshua Gardner played a much more significant role than it actually does in the legend. But,
wow.
Yeah.
And so what's amazing about that is it combines not only your acting, but the fact that here's this playwright, somebody that I think that you end up in later on in your career, you do a lot of writing on your own,
yes.
And how all that developed is just wonderful that you had that exposure at that period of time.
It's really, I can't overstate how important that experience was for me, not just at the time as a student, but how much it informed the rest of my career. Because in so many ways, so many things that I've done since then have harkened back or drawn from that experience at the center at Austin P. Working with the writer to create a new piece, that's something that I've done on numerous occasions since. Trying to tell a community's story, right, which is what we've tried to do in Adams with the Spirit and the Smoke plays, but I've also done that a couple of other places, so that art can meet a community and try to help a community articulate, right, their identity in some, you know, interesting way. The sort of on-the-ground aspects of art, so that it's not all just glitz and glamour and Broadway or television. Those things in particular, but also just experimentation and the willingness to have fun, and that the process can be fun. It's also work, but it can be fun. I learned all of that in my experiences at Austin P. So, and I've continued to draw on that ever since.
Now I'm going to ask a kind of an unusual question for some people. What's your memory from Austin P? Do you have, if you can remember back to that period of time, interacting with students, a faculty member, what's a favorite sort of memory from that time?
There's so many. I will say that a real highlight for me was actually through the center, and I'm going to jump ahead a little. I mean, I have so many. I mean, one experience that I had, I don't know if it's a favorite, but it was a very eye-opening experience. I was working with Arthur on my audition for Juilliard, and I was working on this piece, And he just kept pushing me. He kept pushing me, like directing, kept pushing me. And I wouldn't say I had a breakdown, but I had a sort of breakthrough in that the emotion of the piece that I was working on really took over. And afterwards, I was shaking, right, but with the intensity of the emotion that playing the role. And I had to go outside and calm down. I will always remember that, not necessarily as it didn't feel great, but it was important to go there as a performer so that I could experience what overwhelming emotion can do to a human being, so that you can then channel that later as a performer, right? And again, that's frankly, that's kind of a master's level lesson that I got, in undergraduate school, which was very cool. So there's that. I mean, we had so much fun in the green room, many things that I shouldn't talk about, and I won't. But we had a lot of fun, a lot of funny stories, and, just a lot of hanging out with people that I liked and joking around and, saying things to each other that, many of which you can't say anymore in public. But it was fun, and I liked that theater vibe. It's a little transgressive, but in a good way, pushing boundaries. I learned all those lessons too. So,
well, I'm sure our theater students are still learning those lessons in Traherne.
I would imagine
those type of relationships. I'll just tell you, you didn't share this with me, but when people would share the legend of David Alford with me, is they said he was so amazing when he was here that people said he needed to go to Juilliard as his next step.
Wow.
That was the next progression in his career. And so as you went in, and must have just been thrilled to have that opportunity.
Well, I was so lucky, and it's the center, right? Because I got connected with Arthur, and he walked up to me one day. I'll never forget this moment. Well, this is the moment. He walked up to me and he said, "David," he said, "have you ever?" He said, "You're very good and you're very talented, and you could probably make a living doing this. But if you really want to be considered a fine actor, you should really try to go to one of these, schools, these training schools like Yale or Juilliard, someplace like that. Don't you think?" And I said, "Wait, back up to the point where you said I could make a living doing this, because literally no one has ever said that to me before." And so he said, "No, sure." And he said, "If you don't mind, I will make some calls and see sort of where people think the best place is to be right now." And I said, "Sure." And a week or so went by, and I thought he'd forgotten, and I walked up to him and I said, "You remember telling me that I should go to some good school?" And he goes, "Oh, yes." And he was an eccentric dude. So he starts digging in his bag. And by the way, back then, men didn't carry bags. But he was like one of the first men I'd ever met that actually had a shoulder bag. He digs in it, he pulls out, and he says, "Yes, I've done some talking to people, and it seems like Juilliard is the place to be. And I hope this is okay, but I went ahead and called. They've closed auditions for the year, but they've decided to see you on the strength of my recommendation." So, and then he says, "And so it's going to be April," he had the date, he says April. And he said, "And I figured, I don't know if you have any money, but I've got some frequent flyer miles, so you can use my airplane ticket. So you just got to figure out where you're going to stay." And so I was like, yeah, okay. And so my parents were kind enough to pay for my hotel room. I flew up. I worked on the audition pieces with Arthur and with another fellow that was here that had trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, Paul Meyer. And he really helped me a lot with the verse. I had to do a Shakespeare and a contemporary piece. And the contemporary piece I did, Arthur had written for me, so I knew it like the back of my hand. I was, sort of very prepared, even though it was kind of last minute. Flew up, got in a taxi, hated New York. It was so smelly and noisy and dirty, and my hotel room was unbelievable. It was like the size of this table. It was unbelievably small. But Arthur had arranged for this lovely woman whose name has passed, is gone now, but she was a working actress in New York, and she came and sort of to the hotel room and ran through my pieces with me just to sort of keep me fresh. And she said the nicest thing. She said at the end of it, she said, "That was really good." She said, "They'd be lucky to have you." I'll never forget that, because it gave me a boost of adrenaline and confidence, even though I was in this weird and crazy place. And so I walked into the audition. There were all these stuffy English people sitting on the other side of the desk, and it was exactly what I imagined it was going to be. Like paper chase. You remember John Houseman?
Yeah.
It was that kind of thing. And I had never done an audition like this before in my life. It was really unprepared, so I did my pieces. They said, it says you're a musician, you want to sing us something? I said, sure, because I was, and I went over and played a song that I'd written, you know. And they all looked at each other, and then the head of the division, he was a character. His name was Langham, Michael Langham, and he said, why do you want to come to Juilliard? And I said, just being like cocky person, I said, well, it is the best performing arts school in the world, is it not? And he goes, oh, yes, I suppose it is. And that was the end of that exchange. And I didn't know what to do. And I kind of looked at them, and they looked at me, and I said, should I hang out? And they kind of looked at each other because, they didn't know what, So Harold Stone, the managing director of the division, why don't you go upstairs to my office and wait for a couple minutes? And I said, sure. So I went upstairs, sat down, thinking to myself, the longer this takes, the worse it is. And he came up probably 2-3 minutes later, and he said, come into my office. I walked into his office. He said, well, as you can see, we didn't deliberate very long. We'd love to have you. And I said, can I think about it? because I had a girlfriend and serious girlfriend, and I had a band that I had to break up with, and so, he said, why'd you audition if you don't want to come? And I said, no, I really do. I just I got to take care of some things. So anyway, that's a
scary adult moment probably in your life where you're like, this will change where my direction is headed.
And I walked out of the school, and I walked over to the famous Lincoln Center fountain, right in front of those 3 buildings. I got an ice cream cone because I had, 3 hours to kill before my flight. I sat on that fountain, and I'm glad that I took this moment because I'll never forget it. I realized at that moment that my life had just changed. I knew it had changed at that moment, and I was aware enough to be able to take that in. And sure enough, it did. It did change.
Wow. So you go to Juilliard, and I think you said you graduated in the 90s.
91.
91.
Yeah.
What was your plan after that? Did you have another plan? And the reason I say that, David, because I want our students to understand. Sometimes you don't have a plan.
That's right. Sometimes I didn't have. My plan was to be famous and try to get a bunch of work. And that didn't work out. I did not become famous. I did work. I didn't have to get any survival jobs. I was lucky, never had to wait tables or do any of that stuff. I was able to transition straight from school into getting my equity card and working professionally in theater. I was pretty cocky and self-assured at the time, so I actually turned down a couple of soap things because I thought I was better than soaps, which is absurd to say, but it's unfortunately true. A little cocky at the time. And if someone offered me a role on a soap now, I would be, yes, thank you very much. I will be happy to do that. But anyway, I worked for a while, and I was lucky to be able to pay the rent just acting. But the more I stayed in New York, the less I liked living in New York, and also the less I liked show business and the way the entertainment industry operated, and the more I felt that I wanted to do something and start a theater company back home. So eventually that's what I did. In '94, I moved back to Adams on the farm and started a theater company in Nashville.
And that was with Renee
Copeland.
And so now, tell us a little bit about that community and
Sure.
Because I want people to understand again about this next transition in your life.
Yeah. Well, to begin with, I had no concept about how hard it was going to be, like zero. But I was really committed, and we were committed like from a not-for-profit mission standpoint. Our mission was we wanted to give voice to Southern artists and to sort of lay claim to a sense of pride that we could create good theater, professional quality theater in Nashville, right? And we didn't have to go to New York to cast people. We could do it in Nashville. That what it took was a disciplined approach and a philosophy and an aesthetic, right? Of hard work and veracity, right? Trying to tell the truth as often as we can and to not let a mediocre performance go, right? That wasn't going to happen. We were going to just focus on the work. We were lucky in that Renee was married to Scott Copeland, and he had a lot of connections. Scott Copeland was the longtime artistic director of Nashville Children's Theater. And so he was able to connect us with a lot of different people and, vouch for me and, of course, vouch for his wife, Renee, so that we were able to connect very quickly with some of the finest actors in Nashville, many of whom were living in Nashville because they were married to a musician or a songwriter, and they had happened to move there but were incredibly gifted artists in their own right. There weren't that many opportunities in Nashville at the time. There was Tennessee Rep, which was a professional house, and there was Nashville Shakespeare Festival, which was offering some professional contracts, and there was the Dinner Theater. And that was about it for professional theater in Nashville. So there was an opening, we felt, to do edgier work and to really celebrate local artists and to try and create some new work as well. But from the jump, and I literally bought a book called How to Start a Not-for-Profit Corporation. Literally, that's the name of the book. I ordered it, and it was shipped to me, and I just followed the steps in the book, step after step. And that's how we founded the company. I knew nothing about arts management. I knew nothing about fundraising. But I quickly learned that people will trust you with their money if they have it to give, if they believe you, right? And they believe that you're going to take care of their money, and if they believe you're going to use it in the way that you say you will use it. Wow. But you have to honor that. That's a commitment. That's a contract. If you get funding from someone, you had better use it for what you say you're going to use it for. And we always did. And all of that money we used to pay actors. We're going to pay local actors so that they can make a living and get better at their craft, and that raises all the boats, right? If you help actors get better, if they're able to focus on their work, it raises all the boats and makes theater better in Nashville in general. And in the 10 years that we worked on that and that we, slaved away, I really do believe we did it. I think we helped sort of raise the bar for what people came to expect when they sat down in a theater and came to see live performances in Nashville. So.
Well, there's two things that I really want to talk about within your career. And the first one, sort of this creativity, the writing ability that reemerges in Spirit and Smoke are two things that people in the Clarksville area can enjoy because of that. And I saw that just a one-man abridged version of Smoke, and it was unbelievable. So I just want you to talk a little bit about where that came from, because I think that was really two amazing productions.
Sure, thank you. So Mockingbird had been going for, I guess, about 7 or 8 years, and people in Adams knew I was still living in Adams, but I was commuting to Nashville, so they knew the work I was doing. This lovely woman who was very active in the community named Kay Bagby. And if Kay hears this, I love you, Kay. She approached me one day and said, in her way, Kay has a way of making people do things for her. She approached me and she said, "Don't you think it'd be a good idea to have a play about the Bell Witch in Adams?" And I thought about it for about 5 minutes, and I thought, you know what, Kay, that actually is a really good idea. And I happen to have a theater company. So we raised the money to do it, and I had never written a play before. I'd written a couple of screenplays that hadn't gone anywhere, but I always liked writing, and I wanted to do more of it. So I started thinking about people to write the Bell Witch story. I'd grown up with the story. I knew it as well as anyone. And so I decided I would have a try at writing it. And so I wrote it, we produced it. It was just like 6th grade. I wrote it and directed it, and I was also in it in the very first production back in 2002. But also, for me, it was a way of trying to give back to the community that I loved, that I'd grown up in, to help the community tell its most famous story in hopefully a compelling way. And I wanted to try and stay as true to the basis of the legend, the one that I'd been told. So I based it on the book, The Authenticated History of the Bell Witch, M.V. Ingram's book, which is reportedly based on a memoir by the second youngest son, Richard Williams Bell. So I based it on that section of the book. And so we call it The Authentic Story of the Bell Witch. And, it did well. And the next year, my dad helped form, with Kay and several other people in the community, a not-for-profit called CSI, Community Spirit Incorporated, and they have produced the play ever since. So it's been going, it just passed its 20th anniversary.
That's amazing.
Which is amazing, right? It keeps going, and it's incredibly gratifying that they're still doing the play. And the play's been revised. I've done a couple of revisions over the years, but it's still fundamentally the same script that I wrote in 2001. And so after that had been going a few years, Kay approached me again and said, now let's do something about the Night Riders. And so that's where Smoke came from. I don't know, well, I do know why. From the very beginning, I wanted it to be a musical, which sounds crazy because it's such a dark story, and it's really an unpleasant period in history of all the really terrible things that happened. But it was a time of great passion. And I've always felt that what musicals do well is capture a really intense feeling, right? And so that was sort of the reasoning behind that, as to making Smoke a bluegrass musical. And of course bluegrass because it's roots, roots music, kind of from this region.
Now, does everybody always want to talk to you about your time on Nashville as Bucky?
Many people do, but that's understandable because when we do a theatrical production, you're lucky if you can reach 5,000 people. Every single episode of Nashville reached millions of people, so it's understandable that people want to talk about that, and I have no problem talking about it. It was an amazing opportunity, and I'm incredibly grateful that I got to do it and spend time with so many people who really were at the top of their game in every aspect, not just the actors, but writers, directors, producers, and all the crew. It was just to get to know those people and to see how hard they work and how much effort goes into making a show that looks as good as Nashville. It's really kind of mind-blowing. I mean, literally hundreds of people.
Well, it's been such a great journey, David, and Austin P is very proud of you, of course. The region gets to claim you as well, and that's just a special treat. I think that we're so glad that we've been able to talk to you about your career today.
Thank you. I'm proud to be a Gov.
Awesome. And thanks to all of our viewers and listeners out there for not only joining us on the podcast throughout the year, but for our very special edition today. We definitely appreciate it. Make sure to continue to watch us as we continue to profile some of the outstanding alumni we have here in the College of Arts and Letters and Austin Peay State University. So until the next time, stay safe, take care, and God bless.